The year was 1994, and the city of Chicago hummed with its usual rhythm, a symphony of bustling traffic, distant sirens, and the faint melodies of street musicians on every corner. Roosevelt High School stood stoically at the edge of a tired neighborhood, its brick walls weathered by decades of wear. Inside its classrooms, the air was thick with the chatter of teenagers, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, and the occasional bark of a teacher trying to regain control. For Marta Reynolds, Roosevelt High wasn't just a place of work. It was her life. She had walked those halls for over 30 years, her tidy gray bun and cat-eye glasses a familiar sight to both students and staff. She was the kind of teacher who couldn't walk down the hall without hearing at least 3 students call out, "Hi, Miss Reynolds." She would always smile, nod, and respond warmly, knowing each of their names. Her passion for teaching ran deeper than lesson plans and chalkboard diagrams. She believed in the power of education to change lives, even in a place where hope felt scarce. Roosevelt High wasn't a prestigious school. It was an underfunded institution in a struggling community, filled with students who often faced more battles outside the classroom than inside it. Yet Marta saw potential in every one of them, even the ones others had given up on. And that's why Jack Williams caught her attention. Jack was a quiet boy who sat in the back of her history class, his shoulders hunched and his head often bowed as if he wanted to disappear. At 15, he was already taller than most of his classmates, with a lean frame and deep brown eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. But Jack wasn't just quiet. He was struggling. His grades were abysmal, and he rarely completed his assignments. When he did, they were riddled with errors. Marta noticed how the other students treated him. They whispered and snickered when he stumbled over words while reading aloud. Some even openly mocked him, calling him dumb, or worse. It wasn't just the students either. Marta had overheard a couple of her colleagues dismiss Jack as a lost cause in the teacher's lounge, but Marta didn't believe in lost causes. One afternoon, after the final bell had rung and the halls had emptied, Marta found Jack lingering at his desk, staring at a worksheet he hadn't finished. She approached him gently, pulling up a chair beside him. "Jack," she said softly, "I want to help you, but you have to let me." He didn't look up. "I'm not smart enough," he mumbled. "Everyone knows it." Marta's heart ached at his words. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm but kind. "That's not true. You're smart, Jack. You just need someone to show you how to believe it." From that day forward, Marta made it her mission to help Jack. She stayed late after school, working with him one-on-one. She discovered that his struggles weren't due to a lack of intelligence. Jack had undiagnosed dyslexia, which made reading and writing a constant battle. Once Marta understood this, she tailored her teaching methods to suit his needs. She found creative ways to explain concepts using visuals and hands-on activities that helped him grasp the material. Progress was slow, but it came. Little by little, Jack began to improve. He still had moments of frustration, days when he wanted to give up. But Marta was always there, encouraging him, reminding him of how far he'd come. "You're not alone in this," she would say. "I'm with you every step of the way." For the first time in his life, Jack started to believe her. The months that followed were anything but easy. Jack still struggled in class, and there were days when his frustration boiled over. He would slam his pencil down, mutter that it was pointless, and retreat into himself. But Marta never let him stay there for long. "Jack," she would say, her voice calm but resolute, "I know it's hard, but every time you push through, you're proving to yourself, and to the world, that you're stronger than the things trying to hold you back." Slowly, those words began to stick. Marta's support extended beyond academics. She noticed that Jack often came to school wearing the same worn-out sneakers, his backpack frayed at the edges. She suspected his home life wasn't easy, though Jack rarely spoke about it. All she knew was that his mother worked long hours as a nurse and his father was no longer in the picture. One cold winter morning, Marta found Jack sitting alone in the school library, his thin jacket doing little to protect him from the Chicago chill. She approached him with a warm smile and handed him a scarf. "It's an early Christmas gift," she said. "I knitted it myself. I thought you might like something to keep you warm." Jack hesitated before taking the scarf, his fingers brushing against the soft yarn. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Thank you," he whispered. Moments like these became the foundation of their bond. Marta didn't just teach Jack, She believed in him and she cared for him in ways that went beyond the classroom. Over time, Jack began to change. He started asking questions in class, his voice quiet but steady. He raised his hand to participate even if his answers weren't always correct. Marta watched with pride as his confidence grew. His shoulders no longer hunched, his eyes no longer cast downward. By the time Jack reached his senior year, he was a different person. His grades weren't perfect, but they were solid, and he had developed a love for history, inspired by Marta's passionate lessons. He even joined the debate team, where his ability to think critically and articulate his thoughts earned him respect from his peers. On graduation day, Jack stood on the stage in his cap and gown, clutching his diploma with trembling hands. His mother sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face. Marta was there too, clapping loudly as Jack's name was called. After the ceremony, Jack found her in the crowd. He towered over her now, but in that moment, he felt like a child again, overwhelmed by gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Marta smiled, her own eyes glistening with tears. "You did this, Jack. I just helped you see what you were capable of." Those words stayed with Jack as he moved on to college. He worked hard, earning a degree in business and eventually starting his own company. His success was a testament to his resilience and to the teacher who had never given up on him. Years passed. Marta retired from teaching and settled into a quiet life. Her once bustling days now filled with gardening, knitting, and occasional visits from former students who still remembered her impact on their lives. But as the years wore on, her health began to decline. At first it was small things: fatigue, joint pain, the occasional dizzy spell. Marta dismissed them as signs of aging, but eventually, the symptoms became too severe to ignore. After a series of tests, her doctor delivered the diagnosis: a rare bone marrow disease. Marta's world tilted. The disease was aggressive, and without a transplant, her chances of survival were slim. The news spread quickly among her family and friends, but finding a donor was no easy task. Weeks turned into months, and hope began to dwindle. Jack heard about Marta's condition through an old classmate. By this time, he was a successful entrepreneur, his company thriving in the competitive world of tech. But none of that mattered when he learned about the woman who had shaped his life, now fighting for hers. "She needs a bone marrow transplant," the classmate said. "But it's hard to find a match and time's running out." Jack didn't hesitate. "Tell me what I need to do," he said. The process of becoming a potential donor was long and meticulous, but Jack was determined. He underwent tests, filled out forms, and waited nervously for the results. When the call finally came, the news left him stunned. He was a perfect match. Jack's heart raced as he absorbed the information. It felt like fate, as if the universe had given him this chance to repay the woman who had once saved him from a life of self-doubt and despair. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. The transplant was scheduled quickly, the urgency of Marta's condition leaving no time to waste. Jack insisted on remaining anonymous, wanting the focus to be on Marta's recovery, not on him. As he lay in the hospital bed preparing for the procedure, his thoughts drifted back to the days he had spent in Marta's classroom, her voice steady and reassuring as she guided him through his struggles. "You're not alone in this," she had said. Now it was his turn to be there for her. The surgery was a success. Marta's body began to accept the transplant, her strength slowly returning. She awoke in her hospital room, surrounded by her family, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. But one question lingered in her mind: who had been her donor? When the doctor finally revealed the truth, Marta's breath caught in her throat. "His name is Jack Williams," the doctor said with a smile. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Tears welled in Marta's eyes as memories of her time at Roosevelt High flooded back. She had always believed in Jack, but she never could have imagined the profound impact he would have on her life, not just as a student, but as her savior. Marta sat in her hospital bed, the sunlight streaming weakly through the window blinds. Her body felt frail, but there was a warmth in her chest, a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. She had survived the transplant, and though the journey to recovery was just beginning, she couldn't stop thinking about the person who had given her this chance at life. The doctor's words echoed in her mind: Jack Williams. The name transported her back to her classroom at Roosevelt High. She could still see him, a quiet boy with deep brown eyes sitting in the back row hunched over his desk. She remembered the late afternoons spent tutoring him, the moments of frustration that turned into triumphs, and the pride she felt when she watched him walk across the stage at graduation. She had always wondered what had become of Jack. And now, after all these years, he had returned to her life in the most unexpected way. The door to her hospital room creaked open, pulling Marta from her thoughts. A tall figure stepped inside, his silhouette backlit by the hallway light. As he moved closer, Marta's breath caught in her throat. It was Jack, but he wasn't the boy she remembered. He was a man now, broad-shouldered, confident, and well-dressed, though his eyes still held the same warmth she had seen all those years ago. He carried a bouquet of flowers in one hand, his other hand tucked nervously into his pocket. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Jack broke the silence. "Miss Reynolds," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "It's been a long time." Tears spilled down Marta's cheeks as she reached out a trembling hand. Jack stepped forward, placing the flowers on the bedside table before taking her hand in his own. His grip was firm but gentle, a reminder of the strength he had built over the years. "It was you," Marta whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life." Jack nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You saved mine first?" Marta shook her head, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. "I just taught you history," she said with a faint smile. "No," Jack said firmly, his voice steady. "You taught me to believe in myself. You taught me that I was worth something even when I didn't think I was. You never gave up on me, even when everyone else did." Marta closed her eyes, the memories rushing back in vivid detail. She had always known that teaching was a calling, a chance to shape young minds and inspire hope, but she had never imagined the impact her efforts would have, not just on Jack, but on herself. "How could I ever give up on you?" she said, her voice breaking. Jack smiled, his grip on her hand tightening. "And how could I ever give up on you?" They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history filling the room. Marta studied Jack's face, seeing traces of the boy she had once known, but also the man he had become. She felt a deep sense of pride, not just in his success, but in the person he had chosen to be. "You've done so well for yourself," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "I always knew you would." Jack chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I wouldn't have made it without you. You were the first person who ever believed in me. That's something you never forget." Marta's heart swelled. She had spent her entire career pouring her energy and love into her students, often without knowing what became of them after they left her classroom. But this moment, this connection, was proof that her efforts had mattered. "I'm so proud of you, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you are. You've become an incredible man." Jack's smile faltered for a moment, and he looked down at their joined hands. "When I heard you were sick, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. You gave me everything, Miss Reynolds. My life, my confidence, my future. This was the least I could do." Marta shook her head, tears streaming freely down her face. "You didn't owe me anything, Jack. What you've done, it's more than I could have ever dreamed." Jack leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You've always been more than a teacher to me. You were my guide, my mentor, my second chance. I wouldn't be who I am without you." The room fell silent again, the weight of Jack's words settling over them like a warm blanket. Marta felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The fear and uncertainty that had consumed her since her diagnosis melted away, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. "You've given me the greatest gift," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just my life, but the chance to see the impact I've had on yours. That's something every teacher dreams of." Jack smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. "You deserve it, Miss Reynolds. You deserve everything." As the weeks passed, Marta's strength slowly returned. Jack visited her often, bringing her books, flowers, and stories about his life. They reminisced about the past, laughing over old memories and marveling at how far they had both come. For Marta, these moments were a reminder of the power of perseverance, the beauty of human connection, and the lasting impact of education. She had always believed in her students, but Jack had shown her just how far that belief could go. On the day she was discharged from the hospital, Jack was there to escort her home. As they stood outside her small house, Marta turned to him with a smile. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "for everything. Jack took her hand, his expression serious. "You never gave up on me," he said. "I'll never forget that, and I'll never stop being grateful. You're more than my teacher, Miss Reynolds. You're my hero." Marta's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him into a hug, her frail arms wrapping around his broad shoulders. In that moment, she felt the weight of her years lift, replaced by an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. "You'll always be my student," she whispered. "And I'll always be proud of you." Marta sat by the window of her small living room, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow across the room. The potted plants she had so lovingly tended over the years lined the windowsill, their leaves catching the light in a way that seemed almost magical. In her lap lay an old photo album, its pages filled with memories of her years at Roosevelt High, class photos, candid snapshots, and notes from students she had taught over the decades. But today, one memory stood out above all the rest. She flipped to a page where a faded photo of Jack Williams as a teenager was tucked into the corner. It was taken on the day of his graduation, his smile wide and his cap slightly askew. Marta traced the edge of the photo with her finger, her heart swelling with pride. It was hard to believe how much time had passed since that day. Jack had grown into an extraordinary man, and yet, to Marta, he was still the boy who had sat in the back of her classroom, struggling to find his place in the world. She had seen something in him then, a spark, a potential that others had overlooked. And now, that spark had grown into a brilliant flame, lighting the way not just for himself, but for her as well. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Marta rose slowly, her movement still cautious but steady. When she opened the door, Jack stood on the porch, a warm smile on his face and a box of pastries in his hands. "I thought you could use a little treat," he said, holding up the box. Marta laughed softly, stepping aside to let him in. "You're going to spoil me, Jack." They settled at the dining table, the familiar rhythm of their conversations flowing easily. Jack told her about a new project he was working on at his company, his excitement evident in the way his eyes lit up. Marta listened intently, her own joy coming not just from his words but from the knowledge that he had found his purpose in life. As the conversation lulled, Marta reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Jack," she said, her voice soft but steady, "do you ever think about how far you've come?" Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I do, especially these days. I think about how different my life could have been if you hadn't been there for me." Marta smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "And I think about how lucky I was to have you as my student. You've given me so much more than I ever gave you, Jack. You've reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place." Jack shook his head, his voice filled with emotion. "You gave me everything, Miss Reynolds. You showed me that I was worth believing in, that I could achieve something if I worked hard enough. That's something I'll carry with me forever." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history filling the room. Marta thought about the many students she had taught over the years, the countless hours she had spent grading papers, preparing lessons, and staying late to help those who needed it most. It had been a labor of love, a calling that she had devoted her life to, and in that moment, she realized that it had all been worth it. "Jack," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "you've given me the greatest gift a teacher could ever ask for. You've shown me what it means to make a difference." Jack reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "And you've shown me what it means to never give up. I'll never forget that, Miss Reynolds. Not for as long as I live." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Marta felt a sense of peace settle over her. Life had not been easy, and the road she had traveled had been filled with challenges. But sitting here with Jack, the boy she had once guided, and who had now become her protector, she knew that it had all been worth it. Teachers often plant seeds they may never see bloom. They pour their energy, their time, and their hearts into their students, hoping that one day, those seeds will grow into something beautiful. Marta had been lucky enough to witness that growth firsthand, and it had saved her life, in more ways than one. As Jack rose to leave, he paused by the door, turning back to look at her. "Take care of yourself, Miss Reynolds," he said with a smile. "I'll be back to check on you soon." Marta nodded, her heart full. "You've always taken care of me, Jack." "Thank you." He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped her in a gentle hug. "You'll always be family to me," he said softly. As the door closed behind him, Marta returned to her chair by the window, the photo album still open in her lap. She looked out at the world beyond the glass, her thoughts drifting to the many lives she had touched, and the ways those lives had touched hers in return. And as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she smiled, knowing that her legacy would live on, not just in the lessons she had taught, but in the hearts of those who had carried them forward. Jack's final words echoed in Marta's mind long after he had left. "You'll always be family to me." In the end, that's what it had all been about, not just teaching facts and figures, but building connections, fostering hope, and changing lives. Marta had given Jack the tools to succeed, and in return he had given her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that her life's work had mattered. As she closed the photo album and rested her head against the back of her chair, Marta felt a wave of contentment wash over her. Her journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But no matter what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She had never given up on her students, and they had never given up on her. And that was a legacy she would cherish forever.